Hey everybody, it's Brian, back with another vlog of Brian Speaks On. I am Brian, the creator of the Brian Speaks On page, which you can find on YouTube and on Facebook at this moment. For those that know me and know what I normally do is I like to talk about a broad subject, but I usually use a specific example of something that has happened to use as a platform to jump off into a much broader topic. And in this situation, although this subject is kind of a few weeks old now, I still think that it's relevant to shed a particular kind of perspective on it, which I haven't heard too much of. I've heard it in fragments, but I want to kind of like put it together in one broad subject, and hopefully I can speak a little bit faster than what I normally do. That subject is the Beyonce controversy, depending on how you look at it. It's controversial or very uplifting, depending on which side of the perspective you fall on, in regards to her Super Bowl performance and at halftime. And I don't want to talk about the performance itself. What I want to talk about is the subsequent issue that she's had with particular areas of police, fraternities, unions, I should say, looking to galvanize certain police forces to boycott her concerts and not work them for security. And in the advent of that, you have the Minister Louis Farrakhan basically putting out a public notice that if the police do not work her concerts for security, that the FOI will provide security for her concerts. Now, that brings up two very interesting topics that I think need to be kind of spoken out loud about. One is the concept of the power of black empowerment. Now, I have pretty much a video series on the Brian Speaks On page from earlier, a few months back, that I was focusing a lot on black empowerment. Things that we as a black culture, I think, need to focus on to cultivate our culture and strengthen it and build a foundation of strength and power towards black culture and, in a sense, black people in general. Now, when I speak of black empowerment, it is not to be misconstrued with separatism or hate towards other cultures or anybody else, actually, any other person that doesn't fall under that demographic. It has nothing to do with that. It is no different than any immigrant group that has ever come here and has established their own foundation for their people within this society. It's no different from the Italians that have come here, the African immigrants that come here, the Mexican people that come here, the Jewish people, the Asian people who have established their own cultural strength of power and foundation to where they operate from a standpoint of cultural power. That's all it means. Black empowerment, that's all we're talking about. We're not talking about forming some kind of violent revolution against anyone else or speaking from some militant standpoint. We're talking about operating from a sense of within our own culture to be able to help our own people be independent of other people's help. Now, what the police have subsequently done, which, well, they haven't done it per se, but it's possible they could have opened up a particular kind of Pandora's box for themselves, in that they may just wind up costing themselves, in a way, monetarily speaking, for one, but also they may have awakened something within the black culture to be able to see that if we do things the correct way, in an empowering fashion, we don't need you to do certain stuff. And when you establish that kind of thought process psychologically within a culture, you basically galvanize them in a certain way. If like, let's say the FOI, for whatever you think of the FOI and Louis Farrakhan, that's secondary to the topic. If we as black people are able to fund our own security for our own artists to support them, and they in effect support each other. It's a reciprocal balance. You know, you provide a service to an artist who in turn pays you and gives back to their own people. If this becomes a trend, a norm, then you have basically defeated yourself with this showcase of whatever solidarity that you want to talk about, because you feel like Beyonce is somehow disrespecting all police when she speaks about only police who invoke in police brutality and institutional racism. Those two are not one and the same. Just like no one person or no fringe element of one group represents the entire group. It's no different than in any form of society. There are some people who come from a particular background that do certain things, but they do not represent the whole. No different with the police. When we speak of police brutality, we're not speaking of all police, but then again, that should go without being said. So I'm not going to get into that whole semantic argument. But going back to the topic, I do think that if we do this the correct way and galvanize in the correct fashion, we can have a win-win. We can support those who support us, who are of our own culture, and we also become more independent of forces and institutions that don't necessarily want to help us anyway and weren't really established for our benefit. So in that regard, we'll see how that happens. I really have high hopes for that. Hopefully we can create more of a variety of security forces that don't have to have such a polarizing, stigma attached to it. And the second aspect that I wanted to go into with this topic is that I want to go further into the policing aspect of this whole, and it goes beyond Beyonce. It goes towards black people in general, and goes beyond black people. It goes towards all of us, actually, as a society. It's very important to listen to this. Law enforcement in America is not about protecting people. It's within the parameters of the system, but it's not necessarily about that. They make that part of their slogan of advertisement to make you feel better about policing and such. But rest assured, the main focus of law enforcement in this society is to create a society of obedience. They want you to be obedient. They don't want rabble-rousing. They don't want people who represent a particular force that can somehow threaten their law and order. Law and order, as it pertains to law enforcement, is about subservience and obedience. They want you to be obedient. They program us and brainwash us in this society to feel like whatever an officer tells you to do, you're supposed to be obedient and subservient to them, even to the point of putting yourself in a position of vulnerability to their any whim. They could kill you out of your own subservience to them. If an officer for whatever reason has a hateful intent towards somebody, and you're programmed and brainwashed to be completely subservient and obedient to them no matter what their intentions are to you, you basically give your life over to someone who may have every intention of ending it. And that is not what policing is supposed to be about. You're supposed to be a public servant. You are supposed to, in theory, be here for the public protection. You're not necessarily supposed to be here to enforce certain things onto people. But that's what happens, and we all know that that's what happens. What people get lost in are the semantics of who gets it worse than anybody else. And of course, black people will tell you that disproportionately we get it the worst. So we're the most hypersensitive to it. But it doesn't mean that we are the only people who will be affected by this the more that we play apathetic to the situation. Motion sensors. But the more that we are apathetic to the situation, the worse that it will become for all of us as a society, because we allow a militaristic element to grow and be more empowered. The more apathetic we are to that, the less we stand up and resist things that we know aren't right, the more empowered they become to be even more empowered in their hubris and in their powers over us. So it's not necessarily strictly a black thing. It's a societal thing. But again, the more you feed into this consciousness of, oh well, they're officers, they're cops, you're supposed to listen to whatever it is that they say, the more you feed into the actual militarization of this country. Because without dissent, you grant all power to these people. And if they have every intent to do you wrong because it benefits them, like if they want to arrest you because cop needs overtime, they want to pay an extra couple of bills or whatever, they could do that at their whim and use whatever BS sanction of the law that they want to propose that you were violating. That's why you see all these videos of people who really are doing absolutely nothing and yet going to jail at some point during the video, and everyone's scratching their head like, okay, now what did this person do to get arrested, other than maybe get verbally angry? So you need to be careful with that. And being completely obedient and subservient to anybody is a dangerous card to play. When you give your own sense of survival instinct over to someone else, you basically put your life at their whim. And I, for one, am not with all that, and I don't advocate it. I'm not encouraging it with my people nor anyone else. You should know your rights, and you should know what law enforcement is supposed to be for. And if you're not breaking any laws and you're not violating anyone else, or if you're no danger to anyone nor yourself, you shouldn't be bothered by anybody, let alone someone who is actually supposed to be out there to protect you. Now, I'm gonna wrap this up because once again I've spoken a little longer than what I wanted. But those are the two aspects that I wanted to speak about. And good luck to all artists that support the fight against police brutality and institutional racism, whether they be black or otherwise. We all need to recognize that, acknowledge it, and fight against it. It is not simply a black thing, but coming from a black perspective, this is what we speak from, this is what I speak from. But don't just look at it as a black issue, because it's not. It goes way deeper than that. Be a critical thinker. Think for yourself. And with that, I wish us all blessings and the best. Take care. Later.